Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Taos, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the most wonderful time of the year. I did some singing with Calvin Statham on Wednesday. We did the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I thought I was out of all of my lot. It's the only lottery ticket I have because I left this one in the studio. But I was like Megan and Rain up at Costas in the bar on Wednesday. Tuesday, we were at Amici's. There weren't a lot of folks there because it was lunchtime at Amici's and we were kind of in the way. We walked into this Christmas party that showed up in the beginning, but we've had a great couple of days. Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Gina Shock. You will hear her as well as some other really kind of cool people. John Maroon's joined us. Marty Conway proved that I know him, and he sat next to me for the very first time. Sam Sessa sat next to me for the very first time, and we discussed all sorts of rock and roll and fun. I also had a Christmas miracle that happened in Dundalk that you can find on Facebook that involves a Kansas Pacifica belt buckle, and I've already found the guy from Essex within 5 minutes because, hey, it's Baltimore and I'm me and you're you, and this is Baltimore Positive. Luke Jones is here. They're going to play a football game. I feel like Letterman. It's the holidays. It's Pittsburgh week. It's a Saturday night game. It's for the AFC North crown. It's a nationally televised cold weather Lamar Jackson versus future Hall of Famer Russell Wilson. I'll say that, even though they say that about all sorts of people that aren't, might not. He might not. I don't know. Big game, dude. Happy Christmas. How are you, man?
Huge game. Huge game. I mean, you mentioned Ravens, Steelers, the stakes. I mean, it's AFC North lead, or at least moving into a first place tie. As I've mentioned to you, and as I've continued to look at it, the tiebreaker profile does not favor the Ravens here. So they have to win, and they need Pittsburgh to lose one of their final two. And Pittsburgh plays Kansas City and Cincinnati. So it's very plausible, but the Ravens have to take care of business on Saturday, or that's all moot. So biggest Ravens Steelers game we have seen since 2016 Christmas Day with Antonio Brown reaching over the goal line. I'm very confident in saying that. I even brought it up to Zach Gore. That, interestingly enough, that was Zach Gore's last NFL game. That's when his neck, he had the herniated disc issue, and then more of the imaging and all, and they discovered his congenital spine condition that led to his retirement.
By the
So,
way, this is why I love you and having you on because, like, all of the Pittsburgh Baltimore games really blend together for me
oh,
through
no
the
doubt.
years. Like, I don't specifically remember the time Anquan Bolden caught it or dropped it, or Torrey Smith caught it or dropped it, or Todd Heap caught it. Like, literally, there, or what uniforms they wear, those jailbird uniforms they wear, look like they're come out of Three Stooges,
Yeah.
or out of a Striper video from 1988, or like the Killer Bees from John Belushi. I can go on and on and on, but they all run together, and this one will be forgotten when Lamar's playing for the Bears 10 years from now, and whatever's happening, right? Like, but right here and right now, when I think about the big games, it's been a while. I mean, right, it's been a while in this rivalry,
No doubt.
certainly of this magnitude in this game, and the league really nailed these four teams. Oh, I mean, what they're doing, they should all boycott and not play Christmas Day. You as a Christian and me as a family man with my daughter-in-law saying, hey, what time are we coming over? My wife's like, hey, you're picking me up at the airport on Christmas like you always do, right? I'm coming over for my family. I'm like, I'm picking you up in the middle of the game, right? Like, and then I had Will Graves on this week, and he covers the Steelers the way you cover. He covers Pitt Panthers, the Penguins. He's busier than you are for the Associated Press on Pittsburgh. He's got to get out of bed at 9 a.m, hug his kids, and go to the stadium at 10 o'clock to work on Christmas Day. It's insane. But that being said, this league has a rotisserie fantasy little thing going on here with these four teams, and they picked the right four teams, I think, right?
They did. I mean, the only thing that you could have made better was if Buffalo were inserted in that group rather than Houston. But Houston, I mean, they've clinched the AFC South. I was just looking at it. They have the number one defense in DVOA. They haven't lived up to expectations in the way that everyone thought they would. I think everyone thought Houston would take the next step. And if you've watched the Texans, they've been pretty good. They haven't been better than that, but this is their chance. These next two games, all four of these teams. Kansas City has a little less
What is
to
their
play.
next? I mean, do they have a pathway to a two-seater? I mean, like they don't have a pathway to a
Houston,
one.
no. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean,
they're
they
pretty.
can't really move. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
they're kind of they're pretty locked into four. It's not impossible for them to move up to three, but when you kind of look at it, because well, the Ravens or the Steelers are going to win Saturday, and then you see what happens after that. So yeah, but it's a chance for them, an eyeball test, a psyche a series of games for them where they can say, hey, everyone's kind of been sleeping on us. We were the offseason team that everyone was hyping to take the next step to move into the Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore tier of AFC teams. And, they haven't done that, but they've been good enough in a dreadful division to put themselves in the tournament. But bringing it back to Ravens Steelers,
Well, I thought they could have been Cincinnati. Had the schedule makers done
yeah,
this, Cincinnati would have been the more obvious. But Baltimore, Pittsburgh's always like a little bit of a dogfight that they
sure.
can put on Christmas, and that claps better than Cincinnati. And yeah, hey, man, wherever it is, it's really good, is my point. And I guess to
Sure.
wrap my point of it all running together over 30 years of 60 games and the AFC Championship game and the playoff games that have gone both ways in a lot of this, it just feels like it's been a Ray Lewis minute or, and a Hines Ward minute since any of this has been this relevant. And it's exciting, man. It really is, especially with the health of this team, which I know you're going to get into.
Right, right. But you just said it. And I think part of what you mentioned, how you said so many of those games have run together, everything you just mentioned was pre 2016, right? I mean, when you look at what this rivalry has become, and we've talked about this, and I don't want to lament the how this rivalry has waned in recent years, because Saturday is what you hope brings it back to the forefront as far as being one of the best rivalries in the NFL. Not because it's got a legacy at this point, because it does for nearly a quarter century,
Well, the
but
players
because
are
it's
talking that way though this week on both sides, right? You're out.
um
You're out knowing
you
Smills
know
this week.
what?
Short week.
It's funny because I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, and look, I nothing I wrote was earth shattering from the standpoint of one, I think the Ravens need this from a psyche standpoint, not just because of Pittsburgh and they've lost 8 of 9, but because of what lies ahead in Kansas City in January. And
Well, are we good or are we a six-loss team
there's
that just
also
got our ass kicked for the second time at home by a division rival while being a touchdown favorite, right? Like if
there's
that's the way
that
you wake up Sunday morning, that's no good.
there's that, but there's also the implications of that, which would mean you're on the road the entire time. And we know, historically speaking, yes, in a perfect world, you'd have a first round bye, you'd have home field advantage. That's not in the cards. We've known for 2 months that wasn't going to be in the cards for this football team. But you go back to the 2000 Ravens, you go back to the 2012 Ravens. Both historically are viewed as, hey, road warriors. They went to Nashville and beat Tennessee and Steve McNair. They went to the Black Hole and they beat the Raiders in 2000. In 2012, it was going to Denver and the Mile High Miracle and knocking off Tom Brady, avenging the loss from the year before. But both of those teams started with a home playoff game, right? Historically, when you look at, I went all the way back to the start of the 12 playoff team field, which was 1990. There have been four teams that have made it to the Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl where they played on the road exclusively in January. And the last 15 years, it's been two teams, Green Bay back in 2010 and Tampa Bay in 2020. That was the COVID year, Nestor. They never played in a stadium that had more than 7,000 fans in January. So what that tells you is, practically speaking, not a Ravens thing here, but just in a general way, when you talk about playoff contenders, very few teams that don't even have a single home playoff game make it through the tournament and make it through three road playoff games to get to the Super Bowl, to get to New Orleans this year. So they need to win from that standpoint as well. I mean, it's that important for them. And look, let's be clear, Saturday does not guarantee them anything. If they win, they're still going to need another Pittsburgh loss, because if you look at it, if the Ravens win out, but Pittsburgh wins its final two, they're still tied. Pittsburgh would have the tiebreaker in terms of record in common games. So this really is needing Pittsburgh to lose not just Saturday, but needing one more after that, which I think is very plausible when you're saying Kansas City and even Cincinnati, who's still hanging around with a small percentage chance of making the playoffs. So
By the way, there is a potential for Steelers to beat the Ravens and the other game to go the other way, and then Christmas Day doesn't matter for anybody, like really matter at all. And that's kind of a weird thing for the league too, to have those games on and have them be really scrimmages. I mean, if the Ravens lose, I don't. They don't really have much to throw Lamar out there on Christmas Day and run around. And certainly the Steelers won't have to throw around the whole lot to go beat the Chiefs. You know what I mean? Like it as competitive as we feel like it is here leading into Saturday
yeah,
night, the competition part of this, as we already said, Houston doesn't really have an elevator, right? Or a floor. They are where they are, right? And we're starting to get a little bit of that. This is what unlocks this Pittsburgh Baltimore thing, I think, to some degree. And it also opens up whether that last weekend is going to mean anything as far as playing the dogs of the division. And whether Jim Schwartz is going to come with the Bulls trying to knock the Ravens somehow out of a division title, because this thing is really up in the air if the Ravens win the game. It makes it much tighter. It screws things up if the Ravens lose.
yeah, no question about it. It's not. It doesn't make it meaningless because I think if you lose, obviously the division's done. But you'd really like to have that top wild card spot, right? I mean, you'd rather in
Go to
the
Houston.
first round of the playoffs, you'd rather go to Houston than Pittsburgh or heaven forbid Buffalo in the first round. I mean, you're gonna have to play those teams, but you'd rather put that off as long as you can. But your
Browns thought
points.
going Flacco thought going to Houston was a good idea until
Sure,
they
well,
threw the five
sure.
picks
And
down.
look, hey, you get to this point, everyone's good, right? I mean, even the worst playoff team is still decent.
Well, you said like
So
Houston was going to take the next step, and I'm like, well, they played 2 weeks into. They won a game, went
I
on the road, and they
understand.
lost. And so, like, the next step, we've been waiting for the next step here. Then they took the next step last year and they tripped.
Sure, sure.
Like, so the next step now here, obviously, is, but for all of these teams, that's, I had Seth Elkin from the lottery on Tuesday at Amici's, big Steelers fan. I think I had another Steelers fan that talked to him. Will Grace. Nobody thinks the Steelers can win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Nobody. I mean, just they look at Russell Wilson and say, just in a general sense. And I think that that's an interesting observation. And look, man, 6 point. I think it's 6 point now with 6.5 to start at the beginning of the week. Steelers, it's very easy for Mike Tomlin to do the Rodney Dangerfield thing, or for Russell Wilson to do the Rodney Dangerfield thing with that, and for Tomlin to get him say, we beat their ass every time. Bet on us. Yeah, I mean, that's what this thing's going to be juicy by the time. This is exciting. I mean, and I think
Oh, of
to get
course.
down to the stadium and be a part of that this weekend and on the field, the tactical part of this, which I know you want to get to, Pickens, Watt, what that represents, them getting out on the field and ending it. To your point, Steelers win, they take 2 weeks off and sit at home and wait for whatever if they win, right? But if they lose, all hell breaks loose and they got to go dogfight against the Chiefs and against the Bengals at the end of the year. It becomes a different setup for everybody. There's just so much at stake on both sides. So I think I feel like I can hear and give both speeches, but then there's the game itself and what Lamar and Derrick Henry and this offense and Monken are going to try to do to control the ball and play big boy ball against a big boy defense that knows how to play them.
Yeah, and we know what the history has been. I mean, Todd Monken talked about this on Wednesday. I mean, there was video from out at practice of him really working with the wide receivers. They were doing a ball security drill, and he was pretty animated. And I think he was asked about it, and he said, "Well, heck, I've been here for three Raven Steelers games, and we've turned the ball over 8 times, right?" And that's something the Ravens haven't done a lot of. When you look at them in their totality over the last couple of years, they haven't turned the ball over very much. I mean, Lamar has 3 interceptions all season. Think about that. I mean, he's second in the league in touchdown passes, and he's only thrown 3 interceptions. So
And by
it
the way, I
just
want to apologize to the guys on YouTube who hate me and like that I'm more pro Lamar lately. I mean, he's up for a third MVP if he plays really well the next 3 weeks. The Lamar thing for me from the beginning was running into linebackers, but in a general sense, I always thought the sleight of hand would cost them fumbles. It really hasn't. No matter who the running backs have been, from Ingram straight through,
sure.
that has not been in any. I mean, it's clear it's a real big issue for Lamar. Like, Lamar takes ball security more seriously, and dare I say this, than Saint Joe Flacco, who my all-time favorite, because Joe Gunslung, still did 3 weeks ago. But he's still will this weekend if he gets in the game because his mindset was, I got to throw it to win it. Like I'm not going to pull back. I'm going to fire. I'm going to have confidence in my wide receiver. I'm going to have confidence in myself and doing that. And it's not that Lamar doesn't do that, but Lamar does not turn the ball over, man. Like that's how you win an MVP. That's how you get a $50 million contract. Ask Jameis Winston, who doesn't take balls, right? Like that, but Lamar has been great at it, but even better at it than the interception to touchdown ratio, which is gaudy, supremely amazing, Hall of Fame worthy, all of that. Is that sleight of hand thing. I really thought that was messy, no matter what it is, wherever it is, on cold days, on wet days, is it yours? Is it mine? Who's got the edge? Are we seeing the same thing when the ball's in the mesh, right? They're really good at it, man. I mean, we keep talking about it, but they're awful at it against the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean look, I mean they're we've talked about this. They've played so out of character, and that's what's been so baffling about this stretch. And look, I mean, plenty of people, myself included, have focused a lot on they've lost 8 of 9. Keep in mind, over that stretch, there have been 2 games where they've rested starters, although they did win one of those. That was the RG3 2019 finale when they rested starters. And of course, last year when they rested in week 18 and they lost. And, that was no big thing. Lamar's missed 4 games due to either COVID or injury. So we know that there are lots of caveats when you look at that. But there was no caveat when these teams played back in week 11. There was no caveat when these teams played back in October of last year when Lamar actually individually played a really solid, good football game until the interception at the end, but really was his receivers just failing him throughout that game. And then it got down to the last 90 seconds of the game, and Kenny Pickett threw a bomb to George Pickens and beat Marlon Humphrey, and the Ravens lost because of that, right? I mean, these have been close games,
Well, the one
but
earlier this year was about kickers.
yeah. I mean, Justin Tucker and turnovers, right? And not finishing a couple drives, right? I mean, it's not just one thing, but it's been collective. I and
Well, they fumbled the ball on the goal line against the Giants to start the game the other day, and I'm like, come on, man. And then the penalties, come on. I mean, they win by 3 touchdowns. We got to love them up and give them praise. And I felt like a prick because the front of our website had penalties. I would think that the theme this week is penalties and turnovers, right? I mean,
sure,
that's a burr up Harbaugh's ass as to why we have 5 losses. And even if we win on Friday night, to your point, we still got to go bust our ass and win more. Right? I mean,
yeah.
like that. That's
Oh, it's
really
not
the
over,
story
right?
here.
I mean,
Yeah.
the last thing you want to have happen is you finally break through and beat the Steelers, and then you stub your toe against Houston on Christmas Day, which let's call it what it is, regardless of me saying that Houston hasn't lived up to expectations of what people thought they might be, considering the offseason they had. They brought in Diggs, they brought in Joe Mixon, they brought in a lot of offseason additions to beef up what had been a surprising team last year. But you lose that game, then suddenly you could be right back where you thought, right back in a position where you're down a game, especially if Pittsburgh can beat Kansas City. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Mahomes, although he's practicing, it looks like he's going to play, right? For all the talk about his ankle, even just a few days ago. But I I think what's just so massive about this football game, beyond the division, beyond the playoff implications, and not wanting to be in a position where you have to play 3 straight on the road and knowing what kind of treacherous path that is just to try to get to a Super Bowl, let alone try to win, or even just to get to the AFC title game, and how challenging that is. This team just needs to win. They need to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, how can you have any confidence that this January is going to go any differently if you can't beat Pittsburgh in your own building, knowing that I don't think George Pickens is going to play. I mean, we're talking about the end of the practice week, and he hasn't played in 2 games and missed 2 practices to start the week. I mean, that's not to say he won't get out there, and they might make it look like he's got a puncher's chance. I think Watt's going to play. I'd be shocked if Watt doesn't play. But Pickens, I'm less and less. I don't want to say confident. I'm doubting that more and more that he's not going to play, but because he's missed 2 games already and he's barely practiced. So you're talking about a Pittsburgh team that, let's face it, doesn't have a whole lot of explosiveness on offense. What they do have is very much driven by George Pickens. So if he's not out there, it doesn't mean they don't have other wide receivers, but he's their number one. And you look at this defense. This defense has taken away the big plays in recent weeks, right? I mean, it's gotten better in that way. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that it's elite, but it's certainly inspiring more confidence than it did 6 weeks ago. I think that much is clear with Kyle Hamilton on the back end, and we can get into that in a couple moments. But I just think collectively, you look at this football team, Nestor, and I mentioned that 2016 game. What was when you really think about it, and you just said all these games run together, but the last truly big high stakes victory for the Baltimore Ravens against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's probably the 2014 playoff game, if we're calling a spade a spade. So from that, looking at it through that lens, Justin Tucker, the irony of him being a major reason why they lost this most recent meeting, but he was on that team. But who else? Who on this current roster has truly earned their stripes when it comes to Ravens Steelers in terms of really winning a massive football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers? It's a very, very small list. It's a small list of guys that have won more than once against them. I mean, their one win over the last 9 is that weird game where Kenny Pickett was knocked out. It was Mitchell Trubisky on Pittsburgh's side, and Anthony Brown, the practice squad quarterback, finished the game for the Ravens because Lamar was out and Huntley got a concussion. So, I mean, we're talking about you're really getting into the weeds of the details of Ravens beating Steelers. And I went back and looked, going back, beginning with that Christmas Day game, that Antonio Brown game, where Pittsburgh wins the division, the Ravens are knocked out of the playoffs. That 2016 week 16, I guess it was. Going back to that game, the Ravens are 4-12 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That covers the end of the Joe Flacco era, and that covers the totality of the Lamar era. Understanding Lamar hasn't played a whole lot against them, but still, there's still a defense that's given up some late leads. There's still other players who've made mistakes and come up small. So this is a huge game. I mean, for the division, but also for their psyche. I just think at some point in time, you can downplay and say, well, we're not really thinking about what happened in the previous 8 or 9 games. And I get it. Zay Flowers wasn't there when they were losing in 2020. Kyle Hamilton wasn't there when they lost both games in 2020 and lost in 2021. But in its
but the
totality,
institutional memory of the veteran guys isn't very good to give any confidence to the younger guys.
Right, exactly.
And Tucker's not going to be the guy in there right now.
Not right now.
Holding he's the kicker anyway. Coffee and saying, hey, we did this before, we'll do it again. There is none of that, right?
Right. I mean, they're just.
By the way, the game that you and I went to Pittsburgh, that Chad Steele looked at me like, what the hell are you doing here? And everybody in the Ravens office in front of you and me for 6 hours treated me like I'd never seen me before as I was eating Mr. Rooney's cookies. The Ravens won that game. Right.
That was the Anthony Brown game.
That was the Huntley game. Right. Okay. Dude, they all run together. I just remember being in the locker room talking to Calais Campbell and Ronnie Stanley, and they were all happy. They were listening to Latin music, as I remember it. So,
right.
Yes.
But at the same time, let's not look at that game and say that was an epic Ravens Steelers game that people are going to remember 20 years from now. And that's my point. I mean, this is an opportunity for not just Lamar. This is for Mark Andrews and Ronnie Stanley, who was a rookie when they lost that game on Christmas in 2016, and Marlon Humphrey, and guys that have been around a long time who, let's face it, have not won a ton of football games against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And especially when you're talking about this game and the magnitude of this and wanting to keep your AFC North championship hopes alive and wanting to improve your playoff positioning and getting this off their back. I mean, Humphrey was asked about it, and I would agree with him. He kind of said in terms of, the proverbial getting over the hump, he thinks more about Kansas City in that way. And I think that's fair. I mean, the Chiefs have been the team that's been to the top of the mountain 3 times in the last 5 years. Pittsburgh hasn't won a playoff game in how many years now, right? So they've kind of been in
Pittsburgh keeps beating them.
In the regular season, yeah, and I mean they haven't crossed paths in the playoffs in a decade. This is as close as it gets to that, right?
Well, they're on a course, right?
Oh, it very well possible, right? I mean, we could see it in the first round, could be the second round, whatever. I mean, they're both going to be in the playoffs. I mean, even if the Ravens lose Saturday, I mean, there's a scenario this weekend where they can clinch a playoff spot without even winning. So that's not in question, right? I mean, that's not in question.
Well,
But
Houston probably does have a pathway to the three if the Ravens and the Steelers choke. I mean, one of them's going to lose Saturday, right?
yeah,
So might be a little way to make a 4-5 happen that way, but I don't know. But yeah, I mean, as a Raven guy, as a of all the places you could go in January, I don't know. Starting in Pittsburgh to me sounds just as good as starting in Houston if you have to go on the road. I give them odds to go beat the Steelers for the reason that we'll give right now. We all think the Ravens are the better team. They're a
yeah,
6 point favorite. They're at home. Defense is playing a little better. They're healthy as hell. Pickens is a question mark. Watts question mark. Yeah, Justin Tucker's a question mark till he has to kick it at home. And if you play well enough, you don't have to worry so much about that. Finish drives, as they say.
yeah.
Worry about Justin Tucker and the extra point. The Kyle Hamilton thing. I want to bring that up because I would have led with that if I weren't having so much fun with Gina Shock and running around. Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. I was doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour earlier this week. You're going to be hearing all of it. Brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I want to hold the Raven scratch off up because it's the last one in my existence that I have. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care also supporting us. I'm wearing my Liberty Pure shirt. Doug Workman and our team there. 1-800-CLEAN water is the way to make that happen. And my well water and keeping me safe and fantastic during the holidays. But the Kyle Hamilton thing, the change in the defense, the change in the structure. Can I just ask you, what did they want him to do before? What would this sort of eagle eye hawk roll up at the line of scrimmage, playing the bump, maybe blitzing the quarterback, maybe taking on a running back? I don't
Yeah.
know. But what was that position even called? Sort of more like an outside linebacker kind of role. Drafted as a safety, they obviously had different plans for him within the scheme of the defense. This predates Zach Orr, right? This is sort of the mind frame of the organization. The mind's eye of the organization said, he's different than Ed Reed. He's different than Chris McAllister. He's different than Earl Thomas. He's a guy we need to move around, rangy, tall, big enough to handle himself against the tight end. Like, he's a special dude, but maybe playing him in a traditional, safety role, he'll just go to the Hall of Fame as that kind of I don't know, but there's clearly been a change. I'm not there to ask questions. You
Right.
are. They would lie to me if I were there, but I know a lot about defense because I used to sit in these meetings with Rex Ryan and Marvin Lewis and Mike Pettin, and thinking about how they think in utilizing this, there was another level they were trying to get to and couldn't get there because the other players were playing with their food, as you like to say. I love that expression, so I'll use that for it.
Well, there there are two elements at work here. One, Kyle Hamilton's a great football player, and to answer your question, it wasn't one position. That was what made it beautiful, right? It was the fact that, and let's be clear, it's not as though he didn't line up as a deep safety ever prior to the last 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, he'd done that plenty. He just wasn't doing it as often because they were also asking him to play a lot of nickel. They were also asking him to play a lot of linebacker when they went into the dime package. They would ask him to line up on the edge on occasion and rush the passer. So he was doing all these different things.
Can I just do football education for just
Yes.
a few people that come in? When the center comes to the line of scrimmage and you see him looking left and right and spinning the ball and sometimes getting a penalty because he jerks back after the ball set, the center is calling out who the Mike is to identify the defense. The
Right.
center's like 51's the Mike, 52's the Mike. When Kyle Hamilton's at the line of scrimmage and two capable safeties are in the back, and let's say they're in dime, and there's three corners out on the field, and pick your poison as the Brandon Stevens and this melange of players, and Trenton Simpson, who you think has hips and could drop in or maybe even set an edge, like all these other players are out there, the center and the quarterback, and sometimes the quarterback is some slapdick like Tim Boyle who ran third team this week and doesn't like, and sometimes it's Josh Burrow who's 3 steps ahead of you and has two players and a hot tight end that he can read. So this is just me doing jerk football and X and O football. And I got Merrill Hodge on next month. Speaking of like doing X's and O's and all that stuff. But there is a point where this is really effed up when you come to the line of scrimmage and you're the
Sure.
center and you can't identify and your quarterback can't identify and your running back can't pick up who's coming and you're going to get blown. You're going to get your $50 million quarterback's head taken off by Kyle Hamilton, maybe, or maybe he's just going to take the tight end. So I'm with you in all of that. I just wanted to create some confusion out there for anybody listening.
Yeah, and all of that is great, but you need to have two safeties on the back end of the defense then that you trust. And that worked out really well
Until
last
Travis
year,
Kelsey came to town.
and the year before, but not
Maybe it
so
was
much
Taylor
this year.
Swift.
So the big factor here was not just moving Kyle Hamilton, and this is what they won't say because they don't want to embarrass the guy, but it's obvious at this point. They got Marcus Williams off the field. They were terrible with him on the back end of the defense. And Eddie Jackson. I mean, Eddie Jackson's gone. They cut him. Marcus Williams just a healthy scratch. So, uh,
So it
I
took
mean,
him 12 weeks, 10 weeks to figure out, like,
I mean, it,
until we get a real safety, he's the best one we
I
got.
don't,
And let's put him back there,
I
right?
mean, it wasn't that it took them that long to figure it out. It took them that long to try to get Marcus Williams back on track, right? To try to get someone else because we've talked about it. Look, Kyle Hamilton's played great football on the back end of the defense, but we also notice he doesn't make as many splash plays now, which let me be clear, it's your defense isn't as valuable if he's making splash plays, but then you're giving up 20 plus yard completions on the back end, right? You have to, there is a
Well,
little bit of an
the other
element.
thing was Simpson wasn't making tackles either, right?
Oh, and
So the
he's been
guys up,
benched too. He's
right?
benched too
Well, I mean,
now.
so there is that point of if I'm not up there, we're screwed when the running back hits the edge, because he's going to beat the linebacker and we're going to be in 1st and 10 all over again, right?
Right. So you look at this and you can only deal with the personnel that you have right now. I'm guessing one of their offseason priorities after they release Marcus Williams is going to be let's find another safety because we want to be able to, even though we might play Hamilton on the back end a little more than we did in the past, we still want to be able to play him closer to the line of scrimmage when we want to,
And
right?
even
When
if
we
they
have
win the Super Bowl with him in the back, they still,
yeah, exactly. I
yeah.
mean, this isn't a perfect example, but think back to the year where Marshall Yanda moved to left guard. I mean, that was something that was done out of necessity. Now, the difference there was Marshall's shoulder was torn up and he could only play for the opposite side because it protected his shoulder a little bit more. This isn't that, but it's the same principle in terms of having a need, and this is your best option to remedy that. And okay, Kyle Hamilton might not make as many splash plays that are going to show up on social media, but the coverage on the back end of the defense has been much better, much tighter, much cleaner. And the other element that I think is at work here that is really interesting that I knew, but I thought was telling because Marlon Humphrey wasn't even asked about Hamilton specifically. He was just asked about the defense and the pass defense specifically and cleaning up the coverage on the back end and the fact that they haven't given up nearly as many big plays. And look, let's be clear, this defense isn't perfect. They still give up too many penalties. You still don't trust the pass defense as much as you'd like, but it certainly has been much better than it was in the first half of the season. But Humphrey said, I really do think it's Kyle Hamilton back there, not just because of what he does, but now he is able to see more of the defense and everything's in front of him. And it's not just what he's doing. It's also, hey, Marlon, adjust this, adjust your alignment here. Or, hey, linebackers in front of me, watch out for this. I mean, he's really in the same way you thought about Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. Hamilton's not the vocal guy like Ray Lewis. Not that Ed Reed was a very vocal guy either, but he's cut from the same cloth in terms of I think he's just that smart. I think he processes really well. And I think with him being where he is now, compared to being up in the box and the bullets are flying and, it's much quicker. You're much closer to the
Well,
line
the
of
play can
scrimmage.
get behind him there quickly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
but also from a pre-snap
And it will
standpoint,
get behind him if he's rushing the quarterback, right?
right.
Right?
But from a pre-snap standpoint now, everything is in front of him. The defense's alignment, the offense's formation, and I think it allows him to be a little more vocal in terms of positioning people, making an adjustment.
Oh, it's also what got him drafted,
Sure.
right? I mean,
this
it's what he did traditionally and did so well that they drafted him and said, "Hey, we're going to have a special Lawrence Taylor role for you." You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that's really kind of what they did with him, or maybe a Peter Boulware role. I'm
mean,
not sure exactly what I would say because at any point he's a hybrid.
right. And again, long term, I think you still want to have a little more flexibility to use him in that way than they're using him right now. But he's still doing some of that. They just have to pick their spots a little bit
I
more.
called him a hybrid. You called him a unicorn.
But it's really come down to him playing more deep safety. They've gone away from three safety alignments, obviously. And Ardarius Washington's a big part of this as well. He's played clean football on the back end. And they've gone to more, when they're in nickel, there are three corners on the field. Now, okay, that's not terribly unique. They've used plenty of three corner alignments the last couple years. But when they've gone dime, which historically over the time that I've covered the team, when they've gone dime, it's been three safeties being on the field. And it's a safety like Kyle Hamilton or Anthony Levine or Chuck Clark playing in the box, playing closer to the line of scrimmage. Now, when they go dime, they're using four corners. And it's been Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey,
They drafted to
perhaps.
do that, right? That was a institutional offseason decision, correct?
What, to move the four? No, I mean that
Not based on personnel.
that was solely about Eddie Jackson and Marcus Williams not
Okay.
doing the job. So they brought in Tre'Davious White, who's done a nice job in a part-time role. More and more people are clamoring for him to play over Brandon Stevens. So,
Well, the
but
Brandon Stevens part's weird because I think of him as a safety, right?
yeah,
Who was doing more corner. That's where it becomes very. That's where
yeah,
even I get confused and say, well, they drafted Wiggins and they had Stevens and who do they want on the field? Depends on what play. You know
well,
what I mean?
sure,
None of these guys are going to play all the time, right?
right.
So
And look,
yeah.
they've done plenty of that, and they still do that. But it's just been fundamentally Hamilton playing off the line of scrimmage more, and they've really moved away from three safety alignments, whether you're talking nickel or dime. They're going with three corners, which, hey, you have Marlon Humphrey at the nickel. He's played there a lot over the last 7, 8 years. Wiggins on the outside. Stevens, I mean, that's another position. I'm not saying he's going to get benched, but I'm watching that, right? And I think what's interesting is we've seen now back-to-back games, but the Philadelphia game and now coming out of the bye. Marcus Williams is a healthy scratch. So the question becomes, what happens if one of their safeties gets hurt? And I think it comes down to probably Brandon Stevens moving back to safety. In fact, if you go and review the Giants game, and I'm not saying anyone wants to because it was a terrible football game in terms of competitiveness, because it was so lopsided. But if you actually look at that game late in the game, they had Brandon Stevens playing some safety. And I thought that was deliberate from a standpoint of not that they're going to transition him there permanently, but if they have a need, if heaven forbid, if Kyle Hamilton or Darius Washington get hurt in the middle of the game, no, I don't think they're putting Bo Braid or Sanusi Kane out there who are undrafted rookies who are special teams players. I think what you'd see is Brandon Stevens moving to a safety spot, and then they would just go with Wiggins, Humphrey, and Tre'Davious White as their three corners then. So look, Hamilton is the big piece here, right? And I don't say that to be dismissive about him. I've gone on record with you as saying I think Kyle Hamilton has the potential, and he's got to do this for a long time, but I think he has the potential to go down as one of the three best defensive players in the history of the franchise. Terrell Suggs is going to be in the Hall of Fame. So we're talking about three Hall of Fame defensive players in the history of this franchise, and I'm saying that I think Kyle Hamilton can be in the top three. I'm not going to put him with Ray Lewis and Ed Reed because no one, until they force their way into that, no one deserves to be mentioned in that category. But I do think highly enough of Kyle Hamilton's talent and his pedigree to think that he can be in that Terrell Suggs, Haloti Nada tier at the very least, which that's saying something. You know me, I'm not Mr. Hot Take. You know me well enough
Well,
at
you
this
don't think
point.
Marlon Humphrey's there. We don't think Chris McAllister's there. I mean, we
Yeah,
can
I
go
mean,
through the list of, CJ Mosby. They have very good
I don't
players,
put Peter
but
Boulware there. Peter Boulware's a Ring of
correct.
Honor guy, but I
Yeah.
don't put him in that top one or two tiers. He's in that third tier for me. I think Hamilton can be in that second tier. I mean, that's how special I think he can be. Of course, he's in year three, and he's got to do it for another 6, 7, 8 years at a minimum. And that's a lot to ask of any football player, but that's the kind of player we're talking about here. And I think to me, it was just telling to hear Humphrey and even Zach Orr on Wednesday was talking about that. And look, you and I have still talked about doubts about the defense. The penalties have been an issue. They still give up too much on in the pass defense, more than you'd like, but it certainly has stabilized, and it's not a bottom five unit anymore in my mind, regardless of what the stats might look like at this point. In terms of rate, DVOA, things of that nature, it has ascended. It's trending in the right direction, as people would say. But Hamilton's a massive reason why, and they've had to use him a little bit differently. And from a long-term perspective, I think you'd like to get them back to more of that hybrid role, but hey, this is where they are right now. In the same way that you think about when you have season-ending injuries and you have to adjust, right? Marcus Williams, they just had to put it in their mind that whatever he is at this point, it's not the guy that they signed a couple years ago. So you have to treat it like a season-ending injury almost and just say, hey, we can't keep trying to force a square peg into a round hole because he's just not doing the job. And they made that decision after that Bengals Thursday night game. And I think he's played 2 total snaps since then, right? I mean, it speaks for itself where they went safety wise in the same way that Trenton Simpson was benched against the Giants. And now they're going with a timeshare of Malik Harrison and Chris Board. And look, they've done that kind of thing in the past. They've had the weak side spot kind of be a timeshare. You can go all the way back to Josh Bynes and LJ Ford, or go back to even I'm thinking back to Tavares Gooden and Jameel McLean or Donnell Ellerby. They've had guys kind of share that spot, and they've done that because they said, hey, Trenton Simpson, we love you. We think you can still be a good player, but you're not doing it for us right now.
Well, the
You're
best
not
players
getting the
have to
job
be on
done.
the field. That's a hardball
Sure.
thing. That's
Yeah.
a sports thing, right?
So we very much have seen the evolution of the defense in that way. And, that doesn't mean it's not going to change again between now and January, but this is where it is right now. But I think it was interesting to hear Humphrey, who's a longtime veteran, say what you want about him, as far as injuries last year or anything like that, but he's had a heck of a year, and he is their longest tenured defensive player when you look at it. He went out of his way to compliment Kyle Hamilton and the factor of him moving to that spot, and Zach Orr did as well. So it's not the only thing, but it's a big reason why this defense is playing better, and it's a big reason why this defense needs to not give up those Russell Wilson moon balls that even if Pickens isn't out there, he's going to try it to Mike Williams or Calvin Austin or Van Jefferson. The Ravens have to have guys in position, and Kyle Hamilton has done a much better job, not just himself, of course, but also making sure everyone else is calibrated the way they need to be pre-snap.
Yeah, I want to make sure that the yins and that aren't yelling moves in our stadium on Saturday night. Luke Jones is here. He will be there. It is Christmas week. Happy holidays to everybody celebrating. Do it safely, responsibly. Enjoy the eggnog because it is delicious this time of year. And make sure you're listening. I mean, my whole roster of people we've had here during the Crab Cake Tour has been a lot of fun this week. But we visited with Alan McCallum, talked a lot of baseball with him, Matt Campbell from the Baltimore Convention Center. I surprised them. They're best of friends. They both got invited to Amici's. Neither one knew they were showing up, and they both showed up, and we wound up doing some radio. Calvin Statham, my middle school music teacher, who is beloved, also Pikesville middle school teacher. I only taught 59 years in Baltimore County, just 59 years. Joined us. Hall of Famer Gina Shock was with us. My pal Pete Ramundi came on and gave some insurance reminders from Erie Insurance. You hear their ads here as well. John Maroon, who doesn't mind being called Cal's guy. We went through that for about an hour, Cal's guy. So we did a whole little baseball history and retrospective and where Cal is and where Mr. Rubenstein is down at Amici's on Tuesday, as well as Marty Conway, the good professor, came on. Also, and you'll appreciate this, Luke, because you're a Raven historian, Mark Clayton, former first-round wide receiver, Mark Clayton. Joined me this week to talk about his sexy, athletic headphones that the parkour kids can like climb walls and the headsets don't fall off and they can listen to Led Zeppelin. They're not listening to Led Zeppelin. They're probably listening to Slightly Stupid or something like that, or maybe my show, which is slightly stupid sometimes. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery and our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. We're putting it back out on the road on January the 7th. We're coming to, and this is a holiday shout out to Coach Buzz, Bel Air. Metro Auto Parts, Buzz Battaglia. That's one of my old spots from 30 years ago. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We're having fun. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Buckle your chin straps. We'll be back here talking football on Monday morning. Enjoy the game. Happy holidays.